Please rewind this cassette.
For my first video in this series, I'm going to be covering one of my biggest influences. Originally an acclaimed film editor known for his work on The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, The Thomas Crown Affair, and the Oscar-winning In the Heat of the Night. Hal Ashby is one of the most unique and bold filmmakers of the 1970s. You can still feel his influence today with filmmakers such as Cameron Crowe and Wes Anderson. Sure, I know a lot of people like to talk about Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, but honestly, real film fans know Ashby is the man. His 70s run is one I find myself going back to time and time again. Not only are his films funny, and clever, and moving, they're also wonderfully human. Raised in Utah before he moved to California to be a hippie, Ashby was a student of the great Norman Jewison. He directed his first film in 1970 with an often overlooked comedy titled The Landlord, adapted by Bill Gunn from the 1966 novel. The Landlord stars Beau Bridges as a wealthy white man who becomes the landlord of an inner-city tenement. This film covers class and race in a way that was groundbreaking for its time. Although it was ignored by audiences, the movie perfectly captures the irony and comedy of white guilt. A satire that would demonstrate Ashby's skills with blending drama with humor, something that would become a trademark of his later work. This isn't one of my personal favorites, but it's worth checking out for the performances alone. Lee Grant is the standout, and she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. Really enjoyable and fun performance and a memorable movie. Now we come to what is arguably Ashby's most famous movie, a cult favorite known as Harold and Maude. This is one of those movies I think a lot of people have heard about but never actually seen. Disliked by several critics upon release, including Roger Ebert. Harold and Maude only became more beloved as the years went on. I think the dark humor is aged the best, with none of those elements feeling dated. I think a lot of these things still play in a modern context. The story follows Harold, a young man obsessed with death. The first part of this movie covers a series of fake suicide attempts, all of them inventive and macabre. Harold starts a friendship with an older woman named Maude, who is the opposite of Harold. She very much lives in the moment and values every second that she has left. This leads to an unconventional romance that challenges our social norms towards ageism. I think this movie's a lot of fun, and even though it might be too cutesy for some, Colin Higgins' screenplay with Ashby's lively direction paint a portrait of a world that is always shifting out of balance. The movie asks us, why do we live? Is it for the relationships we develop with others? Or is it because that's the only thing we can really do with life? The movie doesn't really answer any of these big questions, but it does leave you with a sense of hope for tomorrow. Harold learns to value life, and in the end, we do too. The movie features a now legendary soundtrack from Cat Stevens, the music being used in a similar way to that of Simon and Garfunkel's work in The Graduate. Harold and Maude is a treat for the eyes and the ears, often copied, but never really matched. A unique movie that stands out in the decade. Now we come to my personal favorite of Ashby's filmography, a true 70s classic. The Last Detail is packed with huge talent. Jack Nicholson's the lead, a script from the legendary Robert Towne. There's so much to like about this movie that it deserves its own video, but I'm going to try to cover it here in just a couple of minutes. Known most famously for its profane dialogue, the filmmaker this movie makes me think of the most is Quentin Tarantino, in the way it creates rhythm with its words, subverts genre conventions, and deals with the honor and bonds between men. I wouldn't be shocked if he was a huge fan of it. The film follows two Navy men who must escort an 18-year-old to prison, who's been sentenced to 8 years in the brig for stealing $40 from a charity fund. In the most classic sense, this is a road movie. They want to give this guy a good time, get him drunk, get him high, get him laid, and let him live a little life before he gets locked up. Every moment is golden, just one standout scene after another. This is one of the all-time great Nicholson performances, up there with Cuckoo's Nest or Five Easy Pieces. And he gives this movie the edge it needs to really work. I gotta say though, after all these years, if there's something I think really stands out about The Last Detail, it's the performance from Randy Quaid, who nowadays became more of a meme than a celebrated actor. Known mostly for his comedy work and stuff like the Vacation franchise, Quaid was once a young and brilliant dramatic actor, giving standout performances in things like this and Midnight Express. I can't help but feel bad for this guy, and this movie works as a criticism of those in power and the system that we allow to exist and to become corrupt. Sure, it's Jack's movie, no question, but Quaid is the heart of The Last Detail. Near the end, there's a moment where Jack's character is just beating the shit out of this guy for trying to run away. But it's not him he's really mad at. He's taking his frustrations out because he's mad about the whole goddamn thing. This movie asks us if there's such a thing as true justice, and the results are as cynical as the decade it was released in. One of the all-time great films, this movie has heavy commentary, great performances, amazing pacing, and standout dialogue from the script by Town. Honestly, if you haven't seen The Last Detail, you're missing out on one of the gems of the early 70s, and I think with time, I know a lot of people don't feel this way because some people nowadays are all like, hey, Being There. I really think this is Ashby's best movie, and I think it could be argued as one of just the great acting movies. I think this features two of the great performances that I've ever seen. So hey, I love Shampoo, and I don't really like how many people sleep on this movie nowadays. Somewhat based off the life of hairdresser turned producer John Peters, he did Batman. Shampoo is set on the election day of Richard Nixon in 1968. From there, we get a movie that's not really about politics as much as it is a satire of the sexual revolution. This is a biting film that fits perfectly well into Ashby's other work. A major commercial success, grossing $60 million worldwide on a budget of $4 million. Today, I think people see this movie as dated for some reason, just a product of its time. And I guess in some ways that's true. But really, when you go back and watch Shampoo with an open mind, it's as entertaining and as relevant as ever. It's honestly one of my favorite comedies, and I love the screenplay by Robert Towne and Warren Beatty. I really dig this movie. I think it's got great energy. I think it's got great pacing. I think it's a very memorable classic 70s movie. I like it in the same way I like something like Tootsie in the early 80s, but a lot of people don't like this movie anymore, and I guess I understand why, but Criterion released it over the last few years, and I recommend picking that up if you want to have a unique film on your shelf that someone's like, wait, you have Shampoo? Followed up by the much maligned sequel, Conditioner.
The film generated a certain amount of controversy. I think some people felt that the character was artificial and silly and not worth writing about. There were others that felt that it was a very serious, although funny, examination of the life and times of our town. You can't hold him up as a role model, but I certainly don't think he's an unattractive or man, or I just don't think he's a very complete one. Well, other people were afraid that he'd be too unsympathetic. I wasn't. I mean, I think that he's an innocent, and I think it's hard for somebody whose sensibilities are that limited to be terribly unsympathetic. I think it's sort of like attacking a straw man. He's kind of sweet. He's a child.
Needless to say, Ashby was on a bit of a roll here. Coming off the major success that was Shampoo, he then went on to direct the epic Bound for Glory, shot by the great Haskell Wexler. Today, this film is best known for being the first film to ever use the Steadicam. A lot of people credit this to Rocky, but it was actually this movie. I've only seen Bound for Glory a couple of times, and while I don't love it, this depression-set biopic of folk singer Woody Guthrie shows the range and craft of the man who made it. Ashby's other films really aren't like this. If there's something that does make this movie stand out, though, it is the cinematography. One of the most striking and beautiful-looking films of its time, and that's really saying something. Worth watching for the visuals alone, but I always found it to be a little overlong and sort of better in its first half than in its second half. Maybe you'll like it more than I do. But still, give it a watch. It's sort of the black sheep of his filmography. Also, a really good lead performance from David Carradine. After the financial disappointment that was Bound for Glory, Ashby bounced back with the very popular and beloved Coming Home. Jon Voight and Jane Fonda both won Oscars for their performances in this, and Ashby received a nomination for Best Director. This is a bit of a love triangle taking place during the Vietnam War. Coming Home is a very traditional Hollywood movie, designed for audiences to fall in love with it. There's still the political undercurrent of Ashby's other films, but this might be his most sincere work in a lot of ways. A bit too much of a conventional melodrama for my taste personally, I still like this movie a lot, and it's worth checking out for the performances alone. But if I have to be honest, this is a film I think is dated the worst out of his 70s work. I can see it being a big deal at the time, and don't get me wrong, I still dig this movie, but it never fully explores what it's trying to say about the struggles of women or the Vietnam War. It ends up feeling like this over-the-top Oscar bait film, and in that sense it was a success. This movie was nominated for a lot of awards. I'm not going to say you should skip this one. It's probably a movie that your parents know very well, but I find it to be the weakest film on the list overall. Having said that, a lesser Ashby film is still better than 90% of the stuff we get nowadays. It's just everything in this movie I've seen before, and I think Bruce Dern's character is extremely over the top, but there are standout scenes between Voight and Fonda that are really emotional, really gripping, and if you're a fan of those two actors and you're a fan of this kind of movie from that time, it's definitely worth checking out. But outside of just being a good movie, like a 3 out of 4 star kind of flick, it's disappointing that Ashby couldn't do more with this. I don't think he really elevates the material, and part of me feels like he made this because he needed a commercial comeback after making the ambitious Bound for Glory. But I could be wrong about that. I mean, he put a lot of his heart into this movie, and it's not like every single one of his films in the 70s was going to be an A movie. One film had to be like a B or a B+. So it's just what happens with these things. He made a lot of movies in a short amount of time.
It's very scary for me to think that maybe it's not going to work out with him.
I know. I worked in this garden.
Then you really are a gardener?
Oh, yes.
Now we come to the last film on our list. A movie that is now considered to be Hal Ashby's masterpiece. In a wonderful collaboration with the great Peter Sellers, Being There is one of the most sensitive and abstract comedies ever made. It's really hard not to fall in love with this movie the more you watch it. Now legendary for its performances and screenplay, a true work of art that challenges your perceptions of what a movie is. The irony here is as cutting as the images are painterly, all filled with a deep sense of purpose and meaning and a gentle sense of sadness. Now this makes the movie sound like a downer, but it's also very funny. You can argue this was Ashby's master stroke of that uncanny ability to balance tones that he started off with in The Landlord. Like many people, I love the work of Sellers, and this is one of his finest moments with the Pink Panther movies and Doctor Strangelove. A character nobody else could have really pulled off as well. Chance is a simple but highly astute individual. His story is one that feels very timely in our current discussion facing class in America. Why do we put so much value in the material? The script plays like a fable with a deceptive layer of wit. Film scholars are still trying to figure this movie out. The last shot is one of the most discussed in all of cinema. What I admire most about this movie is the way Sellers' gentle performance reflects the way Ashby directs the movie. The two complement each other in a way that makes the story work in such a spellbinding and hilarious fashion. It really is the performer reflecting the director and vice versa. Ahead of its time in so many ways, and to me, sort of feels like a Stanley Kubrick film or something he would have made. I can't really think of a higher compliment than that. Really, just one of the most timeless, interesting, cerebral, and yet just utterly wacky, fun movies that I've seen, and I think it gets better every time I watch it.
This is a very offbeat but thoroughly original film. What happens to us during the movie is that we begin to see the world afresh through Peter Sellers' eyes, through the eyes of an innocent person who is seeing the outside world for the first time. And our world does really look strange through innocent eyes. In that way, Being There is not only an original comedy, it's a poetic statement on the condition of our contemporary world. I thought it was a terrific picture.
I thought it was terrific, too. A really good job of direction by Hal Ashby, whose last film is Coming Home.
He's fine.
He does a real good job of taking this very limited tone, because Sellers can only really act within a very narrow range in this particular role, and making it work for the whole movie. I can see how this could be a satiric review for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but the fact that it works and it's inventive and challenging and fresh for 2 hours is a real triumph, and I really like this film.
And a tribute, I think, to Sellers, of course.
Thanks, Gene. So that's it for my brief and sadly uninformed breakdown of Hal Ashby. He went on to much lesser work in the 80s and tragically died in 1988 at the age of 59. When discussing his work with friends, I often combine his first and last name and refer to him as Hashby. I suppose it's a childish abbreviation, but in a way I think of him as a friend, the kind you would give a nickname to. Hashby's work covers so much ground, giving us a defined and sophisticated look at politics, class warfare, men and women, and in his best films, challenges and elevates the conventions we have grown so tired of in Hollywood cinema. He shows that comedies can be more than the limitations people often associate with them. They can be high art. His movies dance with the quirky and the sentimental in the most creative and original strokes. How can someone be so talented with minimalism and at the same time have so much style? His films are like magic tricks. How did he do it? It's a question I've been asking myself for years. And the only answer I've come to is don't be afraid. Don't be shy.